I often get the question, what about those people that don't have access to these capabilities and whatnot? And my sort of response is, I actually trust in the creative capacity of humans without need of any resources, any money or employees. I could come up with an app that connects old people in old people homes sitting there getting bored and depressed and dying with some group corner of society that want to learn a new language or learn a new skill. And so there might not be any commercial model that works because neither of those parts of the marketplace have, let's say, the money to be able to do that. But in a world of abundance, somebody could come up with that application and connect and give meaning to those two parts of society. I trust in the creative capacity of humans to come up with ways to make other people's lives better.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're thrilled to have Daniel Hulme, CEO of Satalia, Chief AI Officer at WPP, and founder of Consium, the world's first commercial research organization focused on machine consciousness. Very cool. He's a global thought leader in AI, and Daniel combines deep academic expertise with entrepreneurial vision, investing in technology that drives societal progress. He's passionate about democratizing innovation and using AI to address humanity's most pressing challenges. Very exciting. Let's dive right in. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's great to be here, Brian. Thank you.
Tell us how your fascination with AI started. What drove you to blend academia with entrepreneurship?
You start to ask yourself, what's your position in the universe? What's consciousness? Can you upload consciousness to a machine? Can you create consciousness in machines? You can't help but kind of get involved in sci-fi and, inspired by sci-fi. I did a computer science degree in AI. So my undergraduate was in AI 25 years ago. My master's was in AI. My PhD was in AI modeling bumblebee brains. I actually continued academic career where for 4 years ran an AI applied master's program in UCL, but I'm currently entrepreneur in residence at UCL, so I help them spin out deep tech companies. I do that for fun. I started a company 17 years ago that's been building AI solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world. I sold to WPP, the biggest marketing company in the world, 3 years ago, where I'm now coordinating AI across 120,000 people. Real interest in big questions facing humanity. And, one of those questions is hopefully being addressed by Consium.
It's amazing. Yeah. So I guess we could start with what is consciousness?
Well, I think, the problem is that, there are different definitions of consciousness. I think, if you were an academic saying that you were doing, research in consciousness a decade ago, you might have been laughed at, but, that's becoming now a really important topic. And Consium has actually managed to gather together, I think, 15 of the world's leading thinkers in consciousness: Mark Solms, Anil Seth, Carl Friston. And the fact is that everybody agree on the definition. There are overlaps between their perspectives, and what I'm interested in is getting understanding of those overlaps. Not what do they disagree on, but what do they agree on, and then what are the behavioral markers that you'd want to look for in a system to be able to determine whether it's consciousness. So what tests can we give insects, biology, humans, or even AIs to determine consciousness? And I've been tracking, since my PhD modeling bumblebee brains about 2 decades ago, a concept or a field called neuromorphics, or spiking neural networks. As we all know, large language models are horrendously energy inefficient. They require lots of energy to learn. They require lots of data to learn. There are many innovations to happen to get to the point where we have machines operating like biological brains. Our brains operate on the power of a light bulb. We learn very quickly. We require very little data to learn. And what I believe will happen is that these neuromorphic technologies will end up being used in physical agents, drones, robots. Those robots then, if they're interacting with the world and learning about the world in the way that biology does, then you could then potentially spawn sentience. And so, I'd like to make sure that we're mitigating any risks associated with that before it happens, but also try to figure out if we can align a conscious machine with values. So I think we've got a relatively good understanding in terms of the behavioral markers for consciousness, and I think the key is then making sure that we put the services in place to identify consciousness in machines before it potentially happens.
Yeah, you said a lot of interesting things there. One thing I want to tease out, which is interesting, is the energy inefficiency of large language models, right? And how many orders of magnitude away we are. You said something along the lines of a light bulb can power our brain. I think it's 20 watts is the actual metric. In a large language model, I think the whole training run will take on megawatt scale, right, in terms of energy. So it's 4 orders of magnitude away, 5 orders of magnitude difference. And then, then you combine that with the parameters, let's say, in kind of the latest, greatest models, trillions of parameters. And then what are the estimates for the brain? Tens of trillions, maybe 100 trillion, 1,000 trillion. We're not sure. Somewhere in that range, depending on a variety of factors. And so we have multiple orders of magnitude of, price, performance, and efficiency to overcome. But what's really incredible, I'm sure you've been interacting with the new O3 models recently. What are your thoughts as you kind of, interact with these latest, greatest models and ask questions and have conversations?
I'm actually probably one of the least users of AI, at least, over the past 3 years, because I think so. My job, in some respects, is to try to make sure that I'm not surprised by new technologies. And, I think we know that a lot of these technologies are based on historic data. And now that obviously they're able to reason and come up with new data. Historically, I never really found them so useful in my job, because my job is to think about the future and kind of help predict where that's going. Now, with the new reasoning models, they're phenomenally powerful. One of the things I've been doing recently is trying to get them to understand music and differences and whatnot in music. And interestingly, they have a real, almost like human-like understanding of music.
So you can upload a song or say, hey, what about the song? And then it could just kind of tell you all the intricacies
It can talk about it from
piece.
Exactly a human perspective, how a human would kind of engage with that piece, which I think is very interesting. And I'm not quite sure if that's reasoning or something else, but it's quite remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe some form of rudimentary reasoning, right? I think if you have chain of thought and you are processing information and then you're referencing the process into the next process, you can almost argue that's some sort of arcane, rudimentary form of consciousness in a way, right? It's that self-referential loop. And now these large language models with the chain of reasoning, chain of thought, are starting to have like, oh yeah, I thought about this, and here's how I thought about that, and I fed forward my thoughts into the next thought about that.
Yeah, and that's sort of that concept, I guess, has been inspired by. There's one of our advisors called Carl Friston who coined the free energy principle. So I guess the idea is you have some sort of expectation about the world. If that expectation is met, you don't need to be conscious of it. But if it's not met, you need to interrogate why it hasn't been met. Now you can interrogate that delta in very simplistic ways or through kind of internal reasoning.
Yeah,
and
I took this action, I expected this result, or I had this thought and I expected the next thought. So it's like the expectation and reality, self-referencing over and over again.
Exactly.
Which can lead to like upward spirals and downward spirals and all the psychological things that we deal with as humans.
Exactly. So as Consium is really trying to lean into some of these big questions. I'm also interested in alignments of one of our hypotheses is, and it's still very much a hypothesis, is that if we built a very intelligent machine, would it be better if that intelligent machine was conscious versus not conscious? I mean, in some respects, human beings appreciate consciousness, not just human consciousness, but other biological or species that have consciousness. And the sort of hypothesis is would we be in a safer position if we built a machine that could somehow appreciate consciousness and that other things can suffer? And that's a big question to try to test over the next 5-7 years.
Right, like if all of a sudden you can download, and I saw a pitch deck around this for a startup where you can communicate with your dog, and it was just so far fetched. But imagine sufficiently large language models can, I don't know, start to translate, hundreds of words to speak to your dog directly. And now you're getting the stream of consciousness of your dog. I'm hungry, I'm scared, I'm tired, I'm excited, I'm happy.
Well, that's what for me is interesting about spiking neural networks or neuromorphics, because I guess when you look inside a large language model, it sort of pretty much all lights up. If you look inside a human brain, there are only certain neurons that are spiking at any one time, which is again why our brains operate in such a low power. There's only activating small parts of our brain, and I think what we've seen, researchers being able to look at that spike train and then recreate what it is that people are thinking. And there's no reason why you couldn't do the same for animals. Kind of look inside the brain of an animal and then recreate what it's thinking and feeling. And we're actually thinking of using that mechanism to train AI. So using spike trains in biological systems to then train AIs, but it's also quite a nice way to potentially determine whether an AI is telling lies or not. You would expect a truthful spike train being very different from a devious spike train. So I am betting on spiking neural networks and neuromorphics being not just important from an energy perspective, but also an explainability perspective.
Right, yeah. And I'm guessing you read the situational awareness paper by Leopold. I don't know if
I'm aware of it, yeah.
You're aware of it?
I've now got an attention span of a CEO, so 15 seconds. So I
Yeah.
struggle beyond the abstract and the conclusion of papers nowadays.
I have a funny story about that. I was waiting 20 years for the new Ray Kurzweil book to come out. He kept like, oh, I'm going to publish it eventually. Singularity is nearer. And it finally came out, just last year or whatever. And right around the same time, the situational awareness paper dropped. And I found myself reading that paper more than Kurzweil's book that I've been waiting for a couple decades. Yeah. Because, he's on the ground looking at what's happening, like really up close and personal at OpenAI. And one of the cases he makes in the paper that's so fascinating is kind of the orders of magnitude of improvement, both in compute being thrown at these models, but also kind of their architectures and algorithms and algorithmic efficiencies. And so he plots a chart, and we're not used to this. We're used to kind of more Moore's law, I guess, as used to like exponential as you can get over the last, especially 30, 40, 50 years. But these AI systems are getting orders of magnitude better. And that's why ChatGPT, I mean, if you really stop and think about it, it only came out a little over 2 years ago, like the 3 point whatever version. So yeah, thoughts on that and like how fast this is improving and where this heads.
I guess, if we looked at the state of, stability, sort of diffusion models and LLMs 7 or 8 years ago, arguably the output was a bit like a toddler. The output was really like, the words were sort of on the right track, but a bit gobbledygook, and also the imagery as the content that had been created was sort of toddler-esque. I think what was exciting, obviously, about the ChatGPT moment was, and I think you probably know more about this than me, but a certain number of neurons meant that it was able to somehow encapsulate some sort of world model, and then actually start to make sense, or at least semi-coherent sense.
Basically, compressed all the information that was trained on into its neural net.
Yeah. Exactly. And arguably, it still regurgitated 50% of incorrect content, but that incorrect content was kind of
shrinking fast.
It's shrinking. I would actually argue that it was a bit like an intoxicated graduate. It had lots of knowledge, but it made things up a lot. What we're seeing now is we're seeing that graduate to like a master's level, so being able to do rudimentary reasoning. I think there's some talk that over the next year we'll have PhD level LLMs. And arguably some of the LLMs now that are coming out are PhD level. You'll be able to get a complex task. It's able to break that task down, apply sort of rudimentary scientific method. So predict that in 18 months, we'll then, another 18 months after, we'll have like a postdoc, something that can actually do science experimentation. And maybe, 18 months after that, we'll have a professor that's not just able to do science, but able to identify interesting questions and hypotheses that we haven't identified and then do science with them. So I think that by the time we get to the end of this decade, we'll have a professor in our pockets, and that professor could be the next natural thing you would ask could you go and build a smarter version of yourself, and then you get into kind of fast takeoff, super intelligence type territory. Yeah. What are your thoughts out of curiosity?
Yeah, this is fun. This is my favorite stuff to talk about. There's a chart floating around the internet that's really fascinating, which is I saw it from AI Digest, and it's the length of tasks that AIs can accomplish is exponentially increasing over time. And so if you go back to the earliest rudimentary LLMs, it can do a task that requires seconds. And then you have, GPT-3, and it can do like a minute task. And then 4 can do like a 2 or 3 minute task. And then you start the chain of thought models like O1 and O3 and 1 mini and all these. And the latest, now we're approaching, hour to 2 hour long tasks that it can do, like human level tasks, not like an AI, because AI, of course, can think faster and has a bigger context window than we do. And that's also that's a fascinating conversation. So I think what you're describing is, these models are already hitting benchmarks that are beyond human level, like in the different domains, the math benchmarks and whatnot. And so now what you're starting to see is sort of the chain of reasoning and agentic workflows accomplish tasks that are more and more complex. And so what some people are talking about is sort of this middling out of labor, where the middle is actually getting destroyed. The middle class, the professional class, the white collars. And all you have left are like kind of the founders and execs on one side, maybe hopefully investors like me. And then on the other side, like all the manual labor that hasn't been, the plumbers, the electricians, the, servers at a restaurant, that robots hasn't yet taken over as well.
Well, I think that's probably true. I think, the pace of technology is accelerating. The problem is that industry embraces technology at a certain pace. One might argue that right now, LLMs could be taking out the middle, but the reality is that it's going to take 3 years for, I think, that to make a real impact, trial and error and, churn and all that kind of stuff. And then, in 3 years' time, I think we will have potentially robots that could do the bottom level, so manual labor. And then if we do have a professor, then that's probably going to be smarter than CEOs. So in 3 years' time, we have removed the middle, but also then the AIs will be then ready and capable to take the top and the bottom, which, very good friend of mine coined the economic singularity. So I guess everybody's familiar with the technological singularity, which is
let's review what the singularities are, what the concept is from. Let's start at the beginning for anybody who's listening that is new to the podcast and new to these concepts. Yeah,
you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it'd be great to get your rendition. But I guess singularity, it's a term that comes from physics. It's a point in time and space that we can't see beyond, and it was adopted by AI, the community Ray Kurzweil, to refer to the technological singularity, which is where we build a superintelligence. I can't remember exactly how he defines a superintelligence, but let's assume that it's a brain that's a million times smarter than us. And then so I don't know if you want to expand on that, but a good friend of mine coined the economic singularity, which is the point in time where we automate the majority of human labor. And again, it's a point. In some respects, it's a point of time that's very hard to see beyond. We don't know what will happen when we can automate the majority of human labor. Now, arguably, I've been building AI solutions for the last 17 years, and we've never freed up whole jobs. We free up tasks, and people have gone on to do more important, impactful things. And I think at least for the next 5 years, we're going to see a Cambrian explosion of new opportunities for people to contribute and whatnot. If I'm honest, I think beyond 5 years, nobody knows what they're talking about. And when it comes to the economic singularity, the two extremes of the argument. One is, when we can free up whole jobs, we probably will. The capitalistic model to reduce costs, increase profits. If that happens very quickly, we see mass technological employment that could lead to social unrest because our economies can't rebalance. And I actually think that is something we need to lean into. I think we need to think about the implications of mass technological employment, whether it be UBI or 4-day working week, whatever. But I guess the other argument, the other extreme of the argument is that as you are removing labor, friction, then you also in turn can reduce the cost of goods. And if that happens with the right timing, you could essentially reduce the cost of education, healthcare, energy, food, transport to the point where they become almost zero. And so that the argument is if we got things right, we can in a world where people can't access paid work, they still have access to all of the things that they need to thrive and survive as a human being. Everything that they need to survive is abundant. And I often ask people, what would you do if you didn't have to do paid work and everything was free? Because I know lots of people probably like you do that don't have to do work, but they're not sitting at home bored and depressed. They're usually using their time and their energy to contribute somehow to humanity. And most people say the same thing, is that they want to travel and indulge in their hobbies and spend time with their friends and families and increase their golf handicap. But if you keep pushing people hard enough, they say the same thing, which is they want to do stuff, something that contributes to humanity. And I think the promise of AI, particularly with regards to labor, is that we could create this world of abundance where people are free to what I believe is live their true humanity, which is actually live not just for themselves, but for others. I do think there are other singularities as well. I don't know if you want me to touch upon those, but I'd be keen to get your thoughts.
Yeah, very well spoken, well said. And I agree with everything you said. I think we enter this, post-scarcity age of abundance where everyone has everything they need and is free to find what makes their heart sing, and yeah, there'll be a lot of crazy creative destruction. A lot of jobs are going to go away. And I think we're already starting to see it a little bit right here in the mid 2020s. I've put a finger on it. We had some company over yesterday, and I realized that half of the people at the little lunch party we were having were unemployed, by choice.
Really?
Yeah, by choice. And I'm like, okay, this is weird because these are smart people, graduate level, educated people that are just making a decision not to work.
And what were they doing, actually, out of curiosity?
Well, one of them is my wife, and she's just taking a sabbatical. And what's interesting about her is she did exactly that. She leaned into creating stuff for humanity. She wrote children's travel books and using AI, right? AI generated art. AI to kind of help her with the script and stuff of the book, and other creative endeavors like that. And I think I love that term Cambrian explosion that you used, where AI is going to fill all these nook and crannies. And I'm already seeing it as an investor on the ground, where it's taking over stuff that people don't like to do, like collect debts. We have an AI company that literally uses multimodal AI, through text messaging, email, and voice calls to go collect debts. Nobody wants to do that. That's a terrible job. I had that job in college. I had to call people and collect debts. It's terrible. It's like a telemarketing job. You get punched in the face over and over again all day. Builds a lot of character, but now AI can do that, right? So there's
But
just
ironically, could do it probably more humanely
right. Doesn't get
than people.
upset, doesn't have a bad day. And you kind of layer on that sort of agentic, human level AI at at least the PhD level. The new O3 models they test out at genius level. IQ of 135, 140, which is top. I think single digit percentage. IQ. And so you layer that across our economy, doing all these tasks, all these jobs, and yeah, you're going to see quite the Cambrian explosion, not just of just little vertical AI startups that only have one person, but also just this flowering of creativity from humanity, where it's almost like a return to the beginning, if you think about it. We all started as hunters and gatherers, just working a couple hours a day, walking around, hunting for food and grooming and dancing and telling each other stories around the campfire and stuff like that. And then we kind of decided to put down stakes and start growing hops for beer, whatever the theory is. But
I sold my AI company to WPP, which is the biggest marketing company in the world, despite knowing nothing about marketing. And I joined them because I believe in their purpose, which is to use the power of creativity to make a better future. The more I've learned about creativity, in the ad industry and beyond, the more I realize how powerful it is. And I really love Steve Jobs' definition of innovation, which is creativity that ships. So, and for me, the most important word in that definition is the word that. How do you get ideas, creativity to the point where it's adding value somehow to the world? And, I think these technologies are enabling us to do that. They're able to, like your wife, able to get these innovations to market very, very quickly. And arguably it's abundant, right? Arguably, if everybody had a phone, they could run these smart models on their phone for pretty much free. And so there is a level of abundance that is already existing.
Yeah, and I love this phrase, creativity ships. Is that the phrase?
Ships. Yeah, creativity that ships. That was the Steve Jobs' definition of innovation.
Yeah, creativity that ships. I love that. Yeah, and I think the barriers to creation now are declining more rapidly than ever before. And I think if you look at the history of technology, every paradigm shift, whether it be, start with mainframes to personal PCs, the internet, mobile and cloud, now AI, you're just seeing the barriers to creation drop precipitously. There's a story, I was on a panel last week at a conference, and the moderator was like, yeah, I mean, my husband, who's a sales guy, created an app. So he went on Replit and just, vibe coded his way to a shippable app that people are using. He just saw a gap in the market. He's like, I'm going to go create an app for people to use. Yeah. And that's the, I think in the future, people are just going to be able to interact with super intelligent AI that's infinitely patient, like the movie Her, guide you through your psychological, whatever you're going through, and figure out who you truly are. And that's really exciting, right? Everybody will be able to really figure out who they really are and what they really like. Yep. And because a lot of people don't know, right? 20 years ago when I, washed out of Wall Street because I grew up poor and I worked really hard, got to Wall Street, like I'm going to be rich and successful. And then I got all the way there and I was like, I hate this and I don't want to do this. And I kept asking myself at 10 or 20 million in the bank, what would I do? And I couldn't figure it out. But it's a great question because that's the existential question that everybody will have to wrestle with.
Exactly. What would
in
you
the next
do
5 or 10 years?
Free? That's right. Let's hope so. I hope people realize that what makes them happy, actually, like you say, isn't a gold-plated Lamborghini. As far as I'm concerned, if you want a gold-plated Lamborghini, you also need a therapist. I think those people that that
great to drive to therapy in, right?
Yeah, I think once you reach a certain level of stuff, having more stuff, I know it's a cliche, just doesn't make you happy. It makes you unhappy, and I think that barrier is not as high as what people think. I think getting to that
I can't wait for my kids to go to college so I can just sell everything and just live out of a suitcase again. I literally, my wife and I, we spent most of our 20s traveling around, backpacking, living out of our backpacks and living all over the world. And that was the happiest we've ever been. And now we're just both looking at each other we can't wait to get back to that. Hopefully we're still healthy in our mid-50s. It'll be 10 years from now. I'll be in my mid-50s. Yeah. But hopefully we're healthy enough to just sell everything and just downsize our lives and just live out of a suitcase for a while,
I often get the question, what about those people that don't have access to these capabilities and whatnot? And my sort of response is, I actually trust in the creative capacity of humans. So going back to your point, without need of any resources, any money or employees, I could come up with an app that connects old people in old people homes sitting there getting bored and depressed and dying with some group corner of society that want to learn a new language or learn a new skill. And so there might not be any commercial model that works, because neither of those parts of the marketplace have, let's say, the money to be able to do that. But in a world of abundance, somebody could come up with that application and connect and give meaning to those two parts of society. I trust in the creative capacity of humans to come up with ways to make other people's lives better. And I don't know if you know this, but there's a term called protopia. It's not a utopia. I'm sure that we wouldn't agree on what a utopia is. We might agree on what a dystopia is, but a protopia is essentially a system that's just getting better. And I think that the promise of AI is to create that system.
Yeah. So let's. I'd love to contrast. I haven't heard that term before, but I'm definitely familiar with utopia, which just means like kind of like almost like heaven on earth.
Yeah.
Kind of post scarcity, post AI, post labor economics kind of stuff, and post singularity. But what is a protopia?
Well, I think utopia for me is I struggle with a utopia because I think there's always going to be scarcity.
We'll figure out something that's scarce. So it'll be energy, raw materials, and yeah.
Mates. If we all had a helicopter, we'd be arguing who leaves first. So time is scarce, and I think there will always be scarcity. But I think obviously there are too many things that cause unnecessary suffering. I think there will still be suffering. We will suffer because it won't be a utopia. But what I'm interested in is getting to the point where we are on a positive cycle to reduce unnecessary suffering of people dying of disease and hunger and not having access to the things that make them happy.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating world. So to bring it back down to the present, because we could stay out there in the future for a while, but we'll come back to it. I think it's we'll put a pin in it for now. But I'd love to get back to your startup and what that was and kind of that journey to selling it to WPP.
Yeah, I never raised any capital actually. I was in Silicon Valley for a few years, trying to sell this idea, which was essentially AI as a service. This was 17 years ago, so it was a bit early. so selling AI as a service to the semiconductor industry, because we felt these algorithms could help improve the testing of chips, essentially. Anyway, it was too early, and we sort of became a consultancy backed by some interesting technology, built solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world, Tesco, PwC. So used algorithms, a combination of algorithms that arguably one might call AI now, so optimization algorithms, machine learning algorithms, to solve big problems in industry, and really learn about how to identify frictions across supply chains and how to build differentiated AI solutions that allow them to be competitive. Because we got really good at understanding how to build innovations and connect those innovations together, and we were approached by a number of organizations to buy us. There were about 120 people, deep AI experts, developers, etc. Again, not raising any capital, and a lot of those conversations left me cold. And if I'm honest, we also spoke to some VCs, and VCs didn't understand how to value us, because are we a consulting company, are we a services company, are we an innovation company, are we a startup studio, are we a product company? So it was hard for VCs to get their head around us. But WPP approached me because we calibrated on a few clients previously. Again, I didn't know anything about marketing, but the sort of synergies were just so exciting. So WPP pretty much touch every brand in the world. I developed some logistics solutions, supply chain solutions that could augment marketing. So can now go to clients and provide last mile delivery, middle mile delivery, warehouse management, all linked together with marketing. WPP have a workforce of over 100,000 people. And I'm really interested in using AI to figure out how to kind of enhance, unlock the sort of capacity, agility of workforce, and do back office processes in not more efficient ways, but more effective ways. So can we reinvent back office processes and make them not bureaucratic, but more exciting? We have a really obviously exciting supply chain that AI is disrupting. They create, a quarter or a third of the world's ads. So content creation with generative AI, audience representation, so synthetic audiences using generative AI, machine learning, predicting performance, optimization, across channels. There's lots of interesting algorithmic problems to solve across the marketing process.
Yeah.
And it's really nice being part of an industry that's being disrupted. And
now, before we continue, a quick word about an incredible resource for startup founders. This episode of the Ignite podcast is brought to you by Build, spelled BYLDD. So what is Build? Well, they specialize with early stage startups, especially non-technical founders and teams, helping you build and launch scalable revenue generating software fast and affordably. Most startups can't afford to drop $100K on some big design engineering agency. Freelancers are risky, inconsistent, and full of project management headaches. For $10K in about a month, they can turn your validated idea into a real market-ready product. It's built for scalability. Past clients have been accepted into Y Combinator, very impressive, received backing from Google, and raised multi-million-dollar rounds. And there's an exclusive offer for Ignite listeners. Get a free UI UX design sprint that's 3 to 4 weeks, a deep dive into your product experience, delivered completely free. This is normally a $10,000 plus service. So head to byldd.com, connect with Ayush and team, mention the Ignite podcast. Let's get back to it. One of the first places where all these new technologies get applied. I was at Rocket Fuel back in the day. Do you remember Rocket Fuel? Yeah, that's where I kind of cut my teeth on AI and big data systems and stuff like that. So I was kind of there during the rise in the fall. And yeah, WPP was a customer, and so were all the other big agency brands. And we're, I think, the first to really apply AI at scale to kind of direct response ads.
Exactly. So, when you're close to the money, when you're close to the end user, you can actually start to see how these technologies can really impact your ROI. So you can really see tangible benefits. So, and as I said, these technologies are completely changing how we operate. And with that change actually comes more emphasis on safety and responsibility. So, as a chief AI officer, I think carefully about not just from a marketing perspective, but also think obviously about the impact of AI on humanity. But WPP has been it's just been a phenomenal acquisition. I think it's been sort of regarded as one of their most successful acquisitions, and we're just thriving in this company, in this industry.
Yeah, it's amazing. You combine this unique model, it integrates advanced AI into organizational design. I have that in my notes. Like what is that, and what inspired that?
So I'm interested in applying AI to creating organizations that can be as efficient and as effective as possible. So whether that's applying it to back office processes, whether it's applying it to workforce, or whether it's applying or solving problems across supply chains, I'm just really interested in removing as much friction from the creation and dissemination of goods. Even back in the day, I was very interested in how do we reduce the cost of goods? How do we make it more abundant using technologies? I did make my life a little bit more difficult because I wanted to kind of reinvent how an organization operates. I think as organizations scale, they end up focusing on probably one type of revenue model, and as you get bigger and bigger, you get forced to diversify your revenue models, but you're not necessarily set up to be able to go and do products if you're a services company, or services if you're a product company, and so that can be challenging for a lot of organizations. The questions I was asking myself was, how do I reinvent how an organization operates system using AI to make sure that we are the most innovative, most dynamic, most fluid innovation provider? And if I'm honest, we're still a long way to go to do that. But we have very few rules in my company, very few processes and structures. The goal was to kind of remove as much of that as possible to enable people to just get out of people's way and empower them to do their job. That was really that's the principle.
Yeah, and I think I'm starting to see that on the ground here with early stage startups. A lot more capital efficiency. Where the best burn multiples used to be 1-to-1. Go burn $1 million, get $1 million, and now it seems to be like raise 500 and get to 2 million. That's the new benchmark, I think, for really high class, world class burn. What are you kind of seeing in a large organization like WPP as you kind of look across all these efficiencies with AI and agentic systems?
Well, I guess WPP have like 28,000 agents operating across the business at the moment, but I think there are three parts of the organization that I'm applying AI to. One is core productivity, so how can you allow people to do faster emails and better PowerPoint slides, which is great, but it doesn't necessarily differentiate your business.
I got a startup for that actually called Roll Stack that helps you kind of.
There we go.
Yeah, like regenerate slides on the fly might be interesting. You guys recreate slides over and over again to pitch brands, right? So exactly. Roll Stack, plug for our portfolio company.
Cool. Excellent. That's always looking at ways of improving productivity. and then you've got your supply chain. And my job is to make sure our supply chain is differentiated. I guess the other question is there going to be a future where a WPP model just doesn't work, right? Where selling time and materials is going to be superseded by technology, and so we actually are moving our revenue model from selling time and materials to selling enterprise AI solutions. So, and that's hard for a large organization to kind of pivot and do that, but it's necessary for us to survive. I think the nice thing about WPP is that they are actually very agile and they are entrepreneurial. So again, I've been very lucky to be given a lot of rope by the leadership to go and kind of do my thing.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. What practical applications do you see emerging from understanding, AI consciousness and how you kind of implement it around the organization?
Well, yeah, I think we're still a long way from building machines that are conscious, but I guess arguably if marketing is explicitly in the business of influence, and that to influence people, you need to understand how people perceive things, and then what do you need to show them to change their perception, to get them to act, to buy, or to click, or whatever. And so, whilst I would argue we're not there yet, I think there's going to be a renaissance of what is called neuromarketing. So really deeply understanding how people's brains work, deeply understanding individual behaviors, organizational behaviors, consumer behaviors, and then going sort of really deep on neuroscience and using that to do, again, better but more safe and responsible marketing. So that's where I'm placing my bets is deeply understanding the behaviors of people and understanding what's needed to influence them in responsible ways.
Yeah, when I was looking at a startup yesterday, we ultimately passed, but it was interesting because they were trying to approach this for small businesses. So WPP, of course, is a huge agency for big brands and enterprises, but I'm seeing sort of this kind of move to, greater and greater levels of efficiency, more revenue per employee, things like that. There's this bet with Sam Altman and his friends that kind of leaked on the internet around like, when's the first unicorn by a solo founder? When do you think like the first $1 billion company will have just one person working at it with just a solo founder with just all AI and software systems beneath it?
I mean, I do worry a little bit about these valuations, if I'm honest. So, we might get to $1 billion company, very quickly, but how sustainable that is, and
or maybe a better measure is like 100 million of revenue, right? Because you could be a $1 billion company and just have no product, right? You're just some prestigious OpenAI researcher who left and raised a big round right away. You raise 50 on a billion or something like that, but maybe like $100 million of revenue, like current 2025 revenue, would be a really good measure of that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Whilst I'm an angel investor, I'm not thickly in the world of startups, but I can't see why we wouldn't be able to create a single unicorn founder. But, particularly as agentic computing happens, because I can create agents that are PhD grade that can go and do stuff. And I think,
well, like I'm thinking about this as a VC. Like, do I need to even scale and hire people as I raise more money and invest in more startups? Because one thing that happened over the last year is, when ChatGPT came out, 2.5 years ago, it wasn't good enough to really do analysis. It could like regurgitate things and do first drafts or outlines of things you want to write, but you couldn't you couldn't dump a zip file in there and just be like, start analyzing this. And now I can take a data room from a startup and just dump it into ChatGPT and say, here's my framework, go analyze, like an analyst would. And it can go do hours of work in 5 or 10 minutes using kind of chain of thought reasoning, unzip the files, analyze all the documents, run it through my framework, which is like about 20 things I like to score on a 5-point scale, go through all my due diligence questions, flag anything. I mean, it literally it doesn't make the final decision and it doesn't like do all the analysis, but it kind of takes a first pass and makes me 10x more efficient. And so now I'm thinking, well, I can do 10x more investing than I did, just a year or two ago.
Yeah, no,
it's pretty wild.
It's incredible. But yeah, I do going back to this idea of a Cambrian explosion. There's going to be many innovations are created because of individuals or small groups of people being able to do lots and lots of things, which again is very, very exciting. So I don't know. I find it daunting to be an investor right now to figure out which to bet on. I spoke to Andreessen Horowitz a few weeks ago when I was in Silicon Valley, and they were saying that organizations that have system of record are, whilst they may not necessarily be adopting AI as quickly as startups, system of record is sticky, HR data, etc. Now, I did have a sort of counter to that, which is if you build agents that can migrate system of record for you, then actually that moat is a lot lower than what you think it is. So
there are no moats anymore, actually.
Yeah,
that's the secret nobody's saying, but the only moat you have is your imagination, creativity, ambition, and execution.
Exactly, and speed to get to market and grab that market. Yeah. Agreed.
That's basically all you have anymore, because there are no technological moats. The AI coders are at least in the top half of coders worldwide. And then all you have now is just like, can you get out there and, like you said, get to market faster than other people and acquire customers faster and respond to their needs faster. So it's like speed, ambition, creativity, imagination, execution. Yeah. And so as I look at a startup now, I look at the tech, I look at the technology. I'm a product guy. I built a lot of products. I'm looking, okay, are they able to, even with AI, build a good product? And then you're kind of just looking for, how big will it get if it's if they're correct. And I think what the interesting trend is, AI is eating software, of course, but AI is eating labor, and capital is eating labor. And so now what you're seeing are all these businesses that are basically just if you look at them, they're just basically like agency labor businesses. Like my startup that does debt collection. That used to be, you'd hire an agency to go make those phone calls and collect those debts. But now it's like this kind of SaaS startup that does it, but it's really just AI. So it's kind of it's almost like labor as a service. And so you're starting to see these like verticalized labor as a service startups that have they're tackling really, really big markets with AI.
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to moats, I think I could definitely see a dotted line to the point where there is no moat and it's speed to market. But arguably, if you're sitting on data that hasn't been exposed to the AI yet, that does contain insights that are useful, differentiated, then arguably that could be a moat, because
the network, some sort of network effect embedded. Like if you're a LinkedIn social network, it's hard to break that up.
Exactly. And again, also, if you in a world where speed is important, if you can obviously engage with deep AI talent to be able to get differentiated AI solutions to market quickly, then that's also arguably a differentiator as well. But there's a very good definition of intelligence that I subscribe to. I know that most people think that the definition of AI is getting computers to do things that humans can do, and forgive me to go back to definitions because I'm sure that it's a well-trodden ground, but like 99% of the things that I hear out there, people are thinking of AI as things that humans do. There's actually a very elegant definition of intelligence from the 80s, which is goal-directed adaptive behavior. It's very elegant. So goal-directed in the sense you're trying to do X, Y, and Z to get some sort of return or whatever. Behavior is how quickly you can move towards that, but the key word is adaptive. Building systems that can essentially adapt themselves safely in production. And when I'm looking at startups, my question is, how quickly can you adapt to a rapidly changing world? Because that's actually synonymous with intelligence.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, in our framework, that's called velocity. Right. How fast can you build, ship, and adapt? Yeah, that's definitely in our framework. So as the AI strategy lead at WPP, do you have any fun or impactful stories of AI integration that impacted businesses or benefited you guys somehow?
Yeah, so again, I get very excited about the supply chain and not necessarily core productivity. So we've actually coined what we call four brains that arguably, when combined together, solve end-to-end marketing. We have a set of brains called brand brains. So brand brains' task goal is to produce brand specific production grade differentiated content. It's very, very hard actually to get a diffusion model or whatever to produce an ad that's perfect. It's something wrong with a logo or the copy or whatever. And so closing that last mile, going from 80% good to 100% good, is actually very hard. You have to go into pre-production and all that kind of stuff. So I'm tasked with figuring out, can we get to the point where we have LLMs or stable diffusion models producing perfect content? And that's really hard and interesting problem to solve. And we're about 95% there now. The thing that's really been exciting is a concept that we call audience brains. So in a world where anybody can create any content, the question is, how do you know if that content's good? Or how do you know how people think and feel about that content? And actually, for the first time ever, we can build brains that recreate how people think and feel about things. If I show you an ad, I didn't know what goes in your mind and body, unless I ask you, and people are not good at reporting on what goes in their mind and body. But now what we can do is we can actually recreate those signals, and we can use those signals to create better content, but also more accurately predict activation. And actually, arguably, the differentiator to build audience brains is not how well you tune and pipeline these technologies. The differentiator is data. If you've got data that allows you to represent those audiences, that's what you need to get. So that's actually been a massive unlock to help us solve our marketing supply chain, content creation, testing it against synthetic audiences, predicting activation, pushing that content across channels.
That's amazing. It's AI generating content that it shows to other AI to evaluate its effectiveness before it actually goes out to humans.
Before you even predict effectiveness. So it's trying to say, is this eliciting the feeling that I want to elicit? So if I'm creating an advert for a horror movie, maybe what I want to do is I want to make this audience feel excited and scared. How do I know that my content is making somebody feel excited and scared? Well, I have to show them. And then the assumption is that will then lead to clicks and likes and sales.
I saw a startup doing this out of YC recently. We invest in a lot of Y Combinator companies. We have a fund that does that, and that's one of our fund focuses. And I love doing it because you just see the most cutting edge stuff. And one of them was that. It was like, I forget what it was called, but it basically simulates, focus groups, more or less, but like focus groups of thousands, where Yeah, you can be like, how is this resonating? How is this pitch deck? How is this marketing message? So fascinating to hear that you guys are doing that. And it totally makes sense. You always get the AI ethics question. How concerned are you with ethics? How do you guys think about it? Is it a concern at all? Like, I tend to be on the skeptical side of ethics, but I tend to think that humans are good and will design good systems. But yeah, I want to ask the ethical question.
I think I was actually convinced some years ago that the concept of AI ethics is actually a misnomer. I know there are lots of people that have rebranded themselves as AI ethicists, but I think the difference between human beings and AI is one of the key differences is that human beings have intent. AIs don't have intent. And actually, it's the intent that needs to get scrutinized from an ethics perspective. Is this the right thing to do? And there are already standards and structures in place to scrutinize intent. You don't need an AI ethics committee. I think people have confused ethics with safety, where they talk about bias and all that kind of stuff. I would argue that's a safety problem. If your AI is horrendously biased, it's going to give you incorrect results, and therefore you've designed the system incorrectly. You've given it the wrong data, or you've not created the right guardrails. And so I think AI ethics is about intent. Said, I'm going to contradict myself now. I think, there are questions like, if we build a super intelligence, do we have the right to turn it off? Now, but those are not questions for business or the layman necessarily. I think, those are the questions for academics and philosophers. So I think there probably is a field called AI ethics, but it's not what people commonly call AI ethics. But when I deploy technologies in production, really there are three questions I ask myself. One is the intent appropriate? The second one is, are my algorithms explainable? Because that helps you then mitigate bias and it helps you make them transparent and auditable and all that kind of stuff. And building explainable algorithms, by the way, is very hard. It's not easy. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. And then the final question you need to ask yourself, and this sounds a bit strange, is not what happens if my AI goes wrong. As engineers, we identify failure points and we mitigate them. But you now need to ask yourself, what happens if the AI goes very right? What happens if it overachieves its goal? Because I can tell you there are many situations where we've built technologies where we've overachieved the KPI that we've been given to focus on, and it would have caused harm elsewhere in the supply chain. In the ad world, I guess there's a human bias called homophily, which is that we tend to trust and like people that look and sound like us. So if I let AI loose optimizing marketing campaigns, then you end up with a world of probably you selling to you, which might be very good for business. It might be good for conversion, but it might be enforcing biases and bubbles and bigotry. So we need to ask ourselves what happens if the AI overachieves its goal and what harm can it cause. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding associated with AI safety. I think for me the big interesting questions are the macro impact that these technologies will have. What happens in a post-truth world? What happens if we build a super intelligence? What happens if consumption massively increases because of AI and we create, we lose control of our ecosystem? What happens if we cure death? If we're able to survey people and deeply understand how people think and feel and influence them? What happens if we create mass technological employment? These are big macro questions I think we're facing and that we need to collectively solve as a species.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we are not ones to proactively solve things as humans. I've noticed we're very reactive. And so we kind of wait until things are a problem and then we try to fix them.
Yeah, well, maybe, one of my hopes, and this is still very much a hope, is that as we hopefully free more people from economic constraints, I hope that those people will use their talents, their creativity, these tools to lead into some of these big questions.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So thinking about the future, bold predictions around the next decade around AI?
I think beyond 5 years, nobody knows what they're talking about. I think, and actually,
which is a very harbinger of the singularity, I think, right? And you see this in sci-fi, right? Where sci-fi now is like kind of compressed timelines. The Star Trek 30 to 50 years ago was way hundreds of years in the future, and like, wow, look at all that. And now like the latest popular stuff is like The Expanse, where it's kind of believable and pretty much in the near future. Like you can't really like imagine things because you have to solve the AI dilemma. Okay, well, what does super intelligent AI look like in the fabric of society? And it's hard to imagine what that even looks like.
That's the point of a singularity. It's a point in time that we can't see beyond. So I don't know.
So what's your over-under year? Like, what's your 50-50 year? Is it 5 years basically?
I think there's a book that I haven't read that I do recommend people, but just because I was in a room with the author talking about it, called Genesis, which is by I think Eric Schmidt, Craig Mundy, and they talked about three things. One, AGI happening in the next 5 years, quantum also happening, and also fusion. And if those three things happen in the next 5 years, then free energy, mass computation, super intelligence, I think all bets are off.
Yeah.
So I think these technologies are going to continue to rapidly improve, and actually, I think industry is still going to continue probably to be slow to adopt them, and I think we're going to end up seeing bigger change coming out of the technology rather than coming out of enterprise. If that makes sense. People using these technologies in crazy
Well, it takes
ways.
time. There's kind of a cultural drift, I think, sociological term for, the technology comes about. And, you think about the iPhone 2007, it didn't really change everything for another, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Same with the internet, right? Like it kind of came out, but it didn't really we didn't really feel the effects of the internet for another 10 years, like until the late 2000s. It was around, but
yeah, I mean, even Demis, I think yesterday I saw an interview, Demis, the CEO of DeepMind, talking about how in 10 years or just after 10 years, we might be able to cure all diseases. Now, it's very hard for me to now see beyond 5 years, but it's a very interesting decade to be alive.
Yeah, and for those who haven't seen the interview, he was interviewed on 60 Minutes, and I think he floored everybody and really brought to light like how powerful AI is coming. And he won the Nobel Prize for the AlphaFold for the protein folding, which can basically fold all proteins now. And you combine that with quantum, like you said, where it can simulate everything all at once. That's pretty radical. And then fusion, which gives you unlimited energy, basically, effectively unlimited energy. So now, like all limitations are not so limiting, and so now you're dividing closer to zero than ever, which is pretty crazy.
It is pretty.
It's pretty crazy. What's funny is I've been waiting for this for decades. The Singularity is near 20 years ago, and I was like, wow, this is all coming. It just made sense to me because he kind of lays it all out with charts and data. And if you go back and read that book, you have to remember he wrote that in 2005. Like a lot of the stuff just sounded far-fetched. Self-driving cars. So, oh yeah, by 2019, self-driving cars. I came actually a few years earlier. And you could argue like it hasn't been fully diffused in society yet, but you see Waymo now rolling out to more and more cities. Yeah, so it's here, right? I mean, effectively, he was right on target. And so like all his targets, and you could argue that we passed the Turing test early. He said 2029. You could argue like we passed it like last year.
Indeed.
Or more than 50% of humans can be fooled into thinking they're talking to a human, but it's actually AI.
Exactly.
That's the classical Turing test.
I think none of us anticipated was how ChatGPT, generative AI, captured people's imaginations and created the arms race. So maybe that was the bit that was missing, is that that was the right trajectory, but there was this event that has accelerated everything.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly the problem in human thinking, right? We're linear thinkers, and so they'll look at it, they'll look at the rate of change, and they'll take the first order derivative on the rate of change, and they'll go, okay, yeah, that, and extrapolate based on where it's at right now. But that inclination keeps growing, that gradient keeps getting higher and higher and going up a wall. And so you talked about the economic singularity. If you look at GDP, there's a chart of GDP out there over the last 500 years, and it just basically looks like exponential. It just starts really low for the first couple hundred years, and then it just shoots up. And we're living on that wall right now.
On that, yeah.
Where everything's doubling every call it 20 years, I think is what the GDP doubles at, but the rate of doubling is increasing, and so that's pretty radical worldwide. And you bring on things like AI and fusion and nanotechnology and quantum and all that stuff, it gets absolutely bonkers. So let's try to close it out with a rapid fire. We'll see how rapid this is given how this conversation's gone. What's the best book you've read on AI, if there is such a thing?
Oh wow, I guess I should refer back to my undergraduate. My undergraduate 20 years ago was an AI, so I've got version 1 of Stuart Russell's.
I've read most of that actually. I think I've read.
Yeah. I've still got my notes from my undergraduate. So this is I think it's version 17 now. So I guess I would probably argue this is probably the best book.
Wow.
On it.
Yeah, I think it's on like version 4 or 5 now, something like that.
Is it? All right, okay.
What's the most underestimated application of AI today?
Optimization algorithms. So what people would have called traditional operations research. I think that the optimization algorithms are heinously underused by industry to solve exponential NP hard, NP complete problems.
Singularity, exciting or alarming?
Both.
Oh, what percentage of each?
100%.
I love that.
It'll change every single day. I'll be so yeah. Sorry, it's 100%.
That's so funny you say that. I was on a panel about AI, and I was supposed to cover the hype section, and I think the moderator wanted me to say it's overhyped, and I was like, no, it's probably underhyped.
Yeah.
I think there's orders of magnitude. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think elevate your expectations. It's coming, and I don't think it's going to have this trough of disillusionment. I mean, look every 3 months we have some sort of breakthrough, and it just keeps happening. They keep scaling the models, they keep chaining them together, and the stuff I see as a demo hasn't even been fully deployed yet. The stuff I see in the pre-seed startups, the earliest stuff, the people breaking out of big organizations that know how to build this stuff, are just now starting to deploy this technology around enterprise and business. So I think it's underhyped. What is your biggest misconception about AI?
There's an aspiration of, can you somehow upload your consciousness to a machine? And that is probably a misconception, because I don't have any idea about how that would happen, nor what consciousness is.
Yeah, sufficiently advanced AI in the future that's super intelligent with quantum compute substrate will probably figure it out if it's possible.
Let's hope so.
I tend to think that anything we can imagine can happen in the universe. It's just a matter of time until we figure it out. Time and technology, right? So time travel, probably someday.
Yep.
What's a company or startup to watch this year?
Consium, my company.
Love it. And why? What is it?
Well, the company that is trying to figure out how to solve or build safe, conscious AI. But I guess, we might be a few years away from being watched, but it might be then Ilya's safe superintelligence. I'd be quite keen to see what he comes out with. He claims that, his first product will be a safe superintelligence, but for me, that sounds like an oxymoron, but let's see.
Love that. Preferred way to unwind after work?
TV, or looking after my kids.
What's your favorite show you watched in the last year?
I'm creating a movie at the moment, so I spent a lot of my time thinking about that on, which is a sort of a courtroom drama trying to interrogate a robot that's killed somebody to determine whether it's conscious or not, and because it sort of leans into this question of should robots have rights. So I'm watching a lot of robot kind of right type things, but actually I've really enjoyed Robots, Love and Death on Netflix. Each episode is very different, but they're very short stories, but inspiring.
I'll have to check that out. One lesson entrepreneurship taught you that academia did?
Surround yourself by advisors and make sure that you utilize them as much as you can. If there was, a genie that gave you one wish, the wish you should ask for is to have lots of wishes. If I was to give one piece of advice, it would be go and get as much advice as you can. People out there that have been through this, but don't reinvent the wheel. You don't have time now to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, find a team that can help ignite you. That's a little joke, because we're Team Ignite anyway. AI regulation, friend or foe to innovation?
I think it should. It depends on where. I think regulation is needed. Whether it's going to happen or not is a different matter. So I would argue that it's a friend right now.
Yeah, to a point, right? I think there is this risk of over-regulating and putting a damper on AI development, and then China jumps ahead, right? Yeah. Because they're doing almost the opposite of regulation. They're pushing, right? And when we regulate AI, the development of AI, it slows us down. And you can see this in other regulated industries, right? Where the cost of education and healthcare and all these regulated industries has just skyrocketed. And the unregulated stuff has gone to the bottom. Now, you have to
caveat this, actually. I just want to caveat this, which is I don't think AI should be regulated. I think we should be regulating the impact, the risks of AI.
There you go. Yeah.
Mass technological employment. Yeah. So I think again,
the societal impact
is a misnomer. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think you should move as fast as possible to develop SGI, and then that way we have it first, and then we can kind of decide how it's implemented. Just like we had lots of other things first, like atomic weapons and other technologies. We can kind of drive, how it works. Who is the most influential person in your career?
Oh gosh, it's a tough one. I really enjoy the team that I work with at WPP, the management team, the board. I have to say, actually, I really resonate with the philosophers of Greece and Nietzsche and things like that. So I know that's not necessarily a good answer, but there are things that you go through in your life and you realize that people were going through the same thing 2,000 years ago, same struggles, same challenges, same thoughts, and so they're ancient philosophers. I've sort of kindred spirit with.
I love that. Yeah, I've been getting into more ancient philosophy recently as well, but only because we went to Greece last summer and we're going to Italy this summer, and so you're kind of
oh, nice.
You're kind of immersed in it,
Exactly.
Which is the next and last question. Which historical figure would you invite to discuss AI and why?
Probably, I was going to say Nietzsche. I was default to Nietzsche. Probably that is not right. What historical figure? I don't know, Turing.
Yeah, imagine if he could see everything that's happening right now. He would probably have a lot of really good thoughts on.
I'm sure he would.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Where can folks find you online?
Daniel@Satalia.com. Connect me on LinkedIn. Reach out anytime.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. Really enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure, Brian. Thank you.